Soon after American combat troops arrived in Vietnam, a strategy debate began. One faction wanted American combat forces to only protect large cities and dispatch units to rural areas only when enemy forces converged to battle local forces. American aid would focus on improving the economic infrastructure and local militia forces. Another faction favored securing all of southern Vietnam with hundreds of American bases. This search and destroy strategy was selected because most American generals favored offensive operations. Yet each base required clean water, electricity, security, and frequent resupply, which required guarding roads, bridges, road mine clearing, weekly convoys, and helicopter runs. This was expensive, required much manpower, left forces dispersed, provided ample targets for the enemy, and alienated the population with frequent combat operations that caused much death and destruction. These small bases with artillery covered their area and supported adjacent bases to rain heavy firepower upon the enemy within minutes. These bases were effective, and hundreds of attacks were repelled. However, bases were vulnerable to surprise attacks, so constant patrolling was required around each base. This allowed enemy forces to inflict casualties with mines and ambushes. In several cases, the enemy quickly amassed forces who overran American bases. Dong Xoa. In June 1965, over 1,000 enemy soldiers attacked this strategic base, defended by 400 South Vietnamese soldiers, supported by American Special Forces advisors and air power. Another 500 soldiers were flown in by helicopter, but most were slaughtered in landing zones. The base was overrun, while 20 Americans died in combat and helicopter crashes, and 13 went missing. A Shaw. In March 1966, 4 battalions attacked this Special Forces camp near the Cambodian border. It was defended by 400 local troops, led by 17 Americans. After 2 days of heavy fighting, the surviving Americans fled by helicopter with some local troops, leaving behind 8 American dead and 5 missing. Most of the local troops were left behind and surrendered or escaped. Another 7 Americans died providing air support as 4 aircraft were shot down. Lang Vei. In February 1968, the enemy employed light tanks to help overrun this well-defended Special Forces camp, despite heavy American artillery and air support. Most of the 500 defending Montagnard mercenaries were killed. Losses among the Americans were 7 killed, 11 wounded, and 3 taken prisoner. Lima Site 85. The U.S. Air Force established a secret navigation site atop a remote mountain in Laos to allow all-weather bombing northward. The enemy learned of this and sent forces to destroy it. The Americans were aware of the approaching threat, but wanted to keep this vital site operating for as long as possible. They waited too long, so in March 1968 it was overrun. 6 Americans escaped aboard a rescue helicopter, leaving 13 dead airmen behind, while their 42 CIA-funded Asian mercenary soldiers perished. Nok Tavak. In May 1968, an enemy battalion attacked this old French force, manned by 150 Chinese mercenaries, led by 8 American Special Forces soldiers and 33 U.S. Marine Corps artillerymen with 2 105mm howitzers. Helicopters flew in 45 more Marines as reinforcements and evacuated casualties during a day-long battle. The base was overrun and everyone fled, with some literally clinging to the skids of a helicopter. 32 Americans were killed and several helicopters shot down. New Ba Dinh. In May 1968, 100 enemy sappers launched a surprise assault on a poorly defended American communications station atop New Ba Dinh Mountain. The base was quickly overrun and burned to the ground. 24 Americans were killed, 35 wounded, and 2 were taken prisoner before the enemy withdrew at daybreak. Most Americans survived in one bunker or by fleeing the base and hiding among boulders. Some refer to the battle as a massacre because the attack was so sudden that many soldiers had no rifles to defend themselves. Kamduk. This large Special Forces camp was abandoned as it was overrun in May 1968, despite reinforcement by an American infantry battalion from the 196th Brigade. Hundreds of friendly civilians and militiamen were left behind as Americans escaped aboard helicopters and C-130 transports. 9 aircraft were shot down and 35 Americans killed or captured. LZ Loon. In June 1968, U.S. Marines landed on Hill 672 to build a fire base. The enemy objected and sent a battalion to attack the 2 undermanned companies from the 4th Marines. After a day of heavy fighting that included enemy artillery fire, half the Marines were casualties. It was decided to abandon the LZ by helicopter, leaving most of the dead behind. 1 helicopter was shot down during the extraction in this battle that left 41 Marines dead and over 100 wounded. LZ East. In June 1969, the enemy overran a small base called LZ East, killing 17 soldiers of the 169th Infantry Brigade and wounding 34 until reinforcements arrived to retake the base and rescue those barricaded in bunkers. Firebase Tomahawk. In June 1969, the enemy attacked and destroyed this firebase. Little infantry support was provided to the gun battery from the Kentucky National Guard. 4 large howitzers and all ammunition was destroyed, leaving 13 American soldiers dead and 50 wounded. Firebase Kate. In September 1969, 30 American soldiers with 156 Montagnard mercenaries established Firebase Kate near the Cambodian border. The base had no road access and was beyond the effective range of artillery support from other bases. Within a month, the base was surrounded and a siege began. After 5 days of artillery and mortar attacks, helicopter resupply ended. The Americans destroyed their artillery and ammo and left with half the personnel killed or wounded. Firebase Rifle. During the early morning hours of February 11, 1970, Firebase Rifle was blasted by mortars and rockets and quickly overrun. 11 Americans and dozens of local soldiers were killed and the base destroyed along with its 2 howitzers. Firebase Henderson. In May 1970, enemy sappers charged through this hilltop, killing 27 soldiers from the 101st Division and wounding 40. All the howitzers and artillery ammunition was destroyed by satchel charges before the enemy disappeared into the night. Firebase Marianne. In March 1971, some 50 sappers overran this base at night, throwing satchel charges, tear gas, and setting fires, then slipped away after a 45-minute rampage. The base command center burned up as 33 soldiers were killed and 83 wounded among the 231 at the base. An investigation found discipline was lax and security poor. The brigade commander was relieved and the fire base closed. Firebase Ripcord. An enemy division surrounded remote Firebase Ripcord in July 1971 and blasted it with artillery and mortars. U.S. Army generals decided to evacuate this vulnerable base. 4 American battalions from the 3rd Brigade, 101st Division, conducted a fighting aerial evacuation that lasted 23 days, with the loss of 75 Americans killed and 463 wounded. Dozens of helicopters were shot down or damaged, while all howitzers and major items of equipment were left behind. Most of these bases were quickly recaptured by American forces, but some were abandoned. Other bases were overrun only after the Americans withdrew under fire. By 1975, all American bases built in Vietnam were overrun. The alternative strategy of just defending the cities may have worked better. Fewer American resources and lives would have been lost, so political pressure to withdraw would have been less. Nevertheless, the Vietnamese had fought for independence for 100 years, and the American people would eventually tire of defending this colony known as South Vietnam. The strategy did not matter because the Vietnam War was lost before American combat forces arrived, as explained in the tale linked below.